All right. Well, we
on.
tried to do the countdown. We're a couple minutes late anyway, so we're skipping the countdown today. We're getting right to it, and we got a big show coming tonight. We have fall camp opening in the SEC and 2025 burning questions. We're going to go sort of rapid fire and just go through the burning questions for every team. So it won't be super in-depth, but we'll just talk briefly about everyone's squad out there and what are the biggest questions heading into fall camp and ultimately the season. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Of course, we are Biscuits and SEC. This is Biscuits and SEC Live. I'm Hammer, that's Boss Man. And we're coming to you, I think, what did we say? This is our 44th show. So really appreciate everybody. Yeah, really appreciate everybody tuning in. How you doing tonight, Boss Man?
Man, I am doing great. It's hot as Hades here in Texas, but check all that out. That is preview season here. It is talking season's almost done. It's time for preview mag season to really start diving into these teams, which is we've been doing a lot of research here for our 16 and 16 series, as well as all the stuff that we've been doing recently with the burning questions. And then last week, as we did just kind of some of the over-unders that we've done, right? And then the overrated, underrated that we had last week, which was a lot of fun. So a lot to get into tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun and really looking forward to talking about some of these burning questions that these teams have going into the season because right now their optimism abounds for just about every program. However, at the same time, everybody has holes that you're kind of looking at and saying, okay, if there's a problem for this team, it's going to be this, right? Or, can this person meet this level? Can this quarterback become what we think they can be? And if they can, that makes the season. If they can't, it could break a season. So going to be fun to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kick us off here, it's actually not on our little show rundown with fall camps opening and our burning questions, but I did want to touch on something that we included in the newsletter this morning. So you can see below at the bottom of the screen, we do a weekly newsletter. Weekly at the moment, we're about to ramp it up to twice a week once the season gets going. But for now, it's on Wednesdays. And Boss Man and I write that, once a week just to keep you up to date with the latest SEC college athletics news. And this week's newsletter that I wrote this morning had a pretty big section on the Trump executive order. Don't worry, we're not going to get political on the show, but obviously this impacts potentially, depending on where it goes, the college athletics and namely college football, the breadwinner or biggest revenue generator in that space. So there's a much more in-depth write-up, as I said, on the newsletter or in the newsletter from earlier today, but just some high-level points I think that are worth hitting on. There were sort of two things, at least from what I read, that this executive order is addressing. First of all, it prohibits third-party pay-for-play payments, essentially, NIL collective payments. That does not include legitimate NIL payments. So, it says in there using their language, right? But it's basically saying we're going to prohibit third-party pay-for-play payments. However, that does not include legitimate fair market value compensation that a third party provides to an athlete, such as for a brand endorsement. So, for example, the Dr. Pepper commercials that have featured, Quinn Ewers or DJ Lagway or whatever. Obviously, those are legitimate. Those players are signing a deal with that brand, participating in brand commercials, so on and so forth. Whatever they're paid is legitimate. What is not considered legitimate by this, and the executive order aims to outlaw, is the collective saying, "Hey, we'll pay you $500,000 a year to come here and maybe you do some autograph signings, maybe you don't, but that's what your NIL deal is going to be. They're trying to nix that. And then the next thing I thought was worth noting is sort of twofold, but in that same vein of preventing the third-party pay for play, they are trying to maintain the amateur status of athletes, not interested in making them employees. And then to further that, they, there's language in this executive order stating basically that they are going to require the preservation and, where possible, expansion of opportunities for scholarships and collegiate athletic competition in women's and non-revenue sports. So trying to address Title IX / again, just non-revenue sports in general, where those sports, regardless of what you think about it, are sort of being left behind or kind of, riding the coattails, as it were, of college football, right? And so they're sort of taking whatever they can get off the scrap heap of the changes being made that college football is driving. So again, this executive order is attempting to address some of those issues. For the most part, it's probably, helps having NCAA lobbyists because a lot of this is sort of on the NCAA's wish list, right? Like, get rid of these third-party NIL deals, maintain amateur status, and promote, non-revenue sports. None of which I think is a bad thing. I'm just pointing out that that's definitely on the NCAA's wish list, so to speak. And then finally, you might have to help me out here with a little more of a political background on executive orders. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like timeline and potential enforcement, I think it remains fairly unclear. In terms of the third-party pay-for-play payments, Trump directed the Secretary of Labor and the NLRB to sort of oversee that. So I guess they will be tasked with coming up with a game plan for how they're actually going to enforce it. And then in terms of the rest of the executive order, he directed the Secretary of Education, Attorney General, Health and Human Services, Chairman of the FTC, et cetera, to set forth a plan that includes, regulatory enforcement, litigation mechanisms, federal funding, enforcement of Title IX, et cetera, within 30 days. So basically, Trump signs the executive order, and then he tasks all of these people within his administration on how they're going to actually do it. So again, there's still a lot up in the air from what I can tell in terms of how this is actually going to work, if it's going to work. But at the very least, and I put this in the newsletter, it's good, I think, that he's paying attention because regardless of, how you feel about these changes that have been going on that led up to this, or even the actual changes in the executive order, we have been begging for somebody to take control of college athletics for a while. And while I don't think the best person to do that is the President of the United States, it is hopefully a good sign that he is aware that college athletics needs help and needs guidance and direction. And he's at least attempting to do that with this executive order. So that was kind of a big word salad. Again, sign up for the newsletter. You can find it online too if you just want to read what we wrote about it today, but there's a little bit more information there. But anything I missed or anything worth clarifying on your end about this Trump, I think it's literally called Save College Athletics executive order. So
yeah, it's over. So we don't need to talk about it much anymore. College athletics has been saved. So thank you to the president for doing that. But in all seriousness, there's not much to add to it. You had a great write-up on it in the newsletter. I would encourage everybody to go sign up for the newsletter. We put a bunch of great stuff in there, a lot of news nuggets that just keep you informed about what's going on in the SEC, what's going on around college football and college athletics. So I actually heard, I'm forgetting her name, so forgive me, but she was a reporter for Front Office Sports. And she went on Texags this week, and I was just listening to different shows throughout the week to try and get more of a pulse on these different teams. And of course, being an Aggie, right, I matriculate to Texags often. Not the message boards, everybody. Don't worry, I'm not a message board poster, but I do enjoy their content. So they had this reporter on from Front Office Sports, and she mentioned two things that are interesting, and one of them aligned with kind of my thinking. And the first one is that executive orders are only enforceable up to a certain point, right? These can get challenged in court. They don't exactly have the total force of law because they aren't set by Congress, right? The laws are set by Congress and they're signed by the president. So it can give guidance to some degree. It can also, tune different agencies to do different things in order, to push the president's priorities. So that is interesting. You mentioned that it's going to be 30 days to really have a plan put together. So look, at the end of the day, I think that it's good, right? That people are paying attention, like you said, especially people at the highest levels of politics now, because we've had folks for years now, Nick Saban, many people, ADs have been yelling for congressional action on this. And the NCAA has even been asking for congressional action on everything because it's kind of a mess. So we're getting looked at by the highest levels of government now to try to get this thing figured out and to try to preserve college sports, because I also think that the Save College Sports Act and some of the things that were in this executive order show that the president is hearing kind of what people are saying about this, and that they love college sports. It's a very American thing. There's nothing like it, across the rest of the world, and people are very fervent and passionate about college athletics, particularly college football. So we don't want it to become something that it's not, and then because of that it loses viewership, it loses fans who have been a fan of the game, fan of their team for generations. So I think we're starting to move in the right direction, which is great. So we'll see where this all goes at the end of the day, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and it shows that people are paying attention to this. And the final thing, to put just a quick bow on it, is that the reporter also from Front Office Sports mentioned that President Trump wouldn't be doing this if he didn't think that there was a lot of interest in this subject, right? And that he think it could probably help him politically to some degree. Well, from a political standpoint, President Trump has done very well across the South, no matter, what you think of his politics in terms of, electoral status and all of that stuff, right? Generally the South has voted for President Trump and really likes what he's doing. So he understands his constituency, and he understands, at least for us, right, in the SEC, and a lot of people in the SEC have been yelling about this, and throughout Big Ten country as well. So he understands his constituency. He understands that a lot of people are very interested in this and want it to be fixed and in a good spot going forward. And so from a political standpoint, I think he's thinking about that as well. So it's a good thing we got these eyeballs on it, and we'll see where it goes from here. But it's not fully saved just yet.
Yeah, correct. And again, I mentioned it in a newsletter, but obviously we will keep a pulse on the situation. And as more comes out within the next 30 days on how exactly they plan to implement some of these orders, we'll keep you apprised of that in there. So again, shameless plug, sign up for the newsletter. But that's enough about the executive order, because it is July 30th, fall camps. Many got started today across the SEC. So football is truly back, which is fantastic. And we're, as we said, going to talk about, burning questions for all these different teams. And we don't have a ton of fall camp, intel. Again, they just started. There's been some opening day press conferences, but we'll kind of just tie that into the burning questions, because I think several of them relate to the opening of fall camp, including our first one with some breaking news, kind of earlier this week with Florida coming out of Gainesville and DJ Lagway's health. So you you wrote up our first burning question, and it's pretty simple. Can DJ Lagway stay healthy for Florida?
I think that's the biggest question for Florida. We've talked about it many times on this show. I love DJ Lagway. I think the ceiling is the roof, to quote Michael Jordan. For DJ Lagway, this kid, he could win the Heisman during his time at Florida. He's an incredible talent, and he is that dude. He wasn't fully healthy last year, as we all know, from multiple aspects. He was dealing with a sports hernia most of the year. Also was dealing with a little bit of shoulder pain. That also flared up more so in the offseason. And then he also had the lower leg injury that he dealt with against Georgia. So he basically was playing on one leg and probably at like 70% for most of those games. And in the games that he started, they went 6-0. So if he's 100% this year, the sky's the limit for Florida. We all know Florida's got a lot of talent this year. I have our Florida 16-16 coming out. It should be coming out tomorrow. So we do a deep dive into Florida. Be sure to check our social media for that posting and go check it out on biscuitssec.com. But everything to me hinges on DJ Lagway's health this year, and he's going into fall camp now. We had it was reported by a Gator 247 writer, I believe, that he's dealing with a lower leg injury and he's in a boot. So he's probably not going to participate too much in fall camp, which they're saying it's minor. It probably is minor. I believe, the Florida officials, when they say that, they wouldn't say that, if it wasn't, I don't think. But you just have to be worried at this point about his health because so much is riding on his shoulders for Florida to be, what they can be this year, which is, potentially an 8-win season again, probably. Schedule's incredibly tough, as we all know, but they have the potential to be an 8 to 9 win team this year with DJ Lagway. Without him, I think he can kiss the season goodbye, frankly. So, we'll see about his health, but that's the biggest burning question for Florida, without a doubt.
Yeah, I agree. And Mike, our friend and colleague, Mike Huseman here of Off Season After Dark, brings up a good point. Tough for Napier to keep his job. I think the only thing I'll add to this, and this is something we can't really know until we see. Obviously, if he's not healthy, that will be clear because he won't be playing. But I saw two people actually bring this up. One, Connor O'Gara of Saturday Down South, and then the other, Brooks Austin, who does a bunch of film breakdowns on Twitter, and I think he writes for a Georgia Bulldogs outlet of some sort. But both of them basically said, even if he starts game one, and let's say he starts all 12 games, which would be a great outcome of all of this, how ready is he going to be? Because you brought it up. Last year he was injured. He missed a lot of practice. Spring, did not throw all of spring because of his shoulder. And now we're starting fall camp, and we don't know exactly how much he's going to be practicing, when he's going to be back. As everyone has said, Lagway, talent-wise, is on par with anybody in the country. Perhaps, some would even argue the most talented quarterback, physically speaking. But he's still young. He's a true sophomore. And we're looking at a guy who was limited in his freshman year on the practice field, missed spring ball, at least throwing, and now is going to be missing fall camp. So, I mean, what is he going to look like? You can be the most talented guy in the world, but if you're not comfortable in your system, if you don't have any chemistry with your wideouts, I mean, how good can you really be? So I think that's another piece to this, where even if he is, healthy, quote unquote, for the season and is able to play, how much have these injuries that have just been mounting up, how much are they going to impact his play on the field, and to where he's just not quite ready or not quite comfortable because he hasn't had practice time? You can talk to anybody, especially at the quarterback position, like, man, reps are huge, and he's been missing out on reps basically his entire career at Florida. So it'll be really interesting to keep an eye on that, even if he is healthy and able to play.
I agree. I'll just add one quick thing, because I know we got to run through a lot of these quickly, but let me pull up Florida's schedule here. So you got whatever the hell that is, LIU there first, and then USF. So your first 2 weeks, right, aren't, not that USF is a total cupcake, but they're not that good. So Florida should beat USF, of course, right? they've been a thorn in Alabama's side, but they shouldn't be a thorn in any other SEC team side, and they never should have been a thorn in Alabama's side anyway. So Florida should come out of that 2-0 no matter what. So you have two pretty good tune-up games there for Florida to begin the season. And also, I think DJ Lagway has been in this system now for it'll be, close to 2 years, 2 years by the end of this year. But he's been in this system now for a while, and he played pretty well in the system last year, right, with limited reps. He wasn't getting first-team reps for most of that. So I would push back on that just a little bit. I'm not too worried about that. I think that it's going to be fine. The thing to worry about a little bit, reps do matter. I'm not necessarily worried about it from DJ Lagway's perspective. It's more about what surrounds him, right? Like getting those reps, because you got to replace your two biggest wide receivers, Jameer DK and Elijah Badger. And so you're going to have you have talent at the wide receiver position, but like you said, you got to get those reps in to make it work. But I do think to some degree DJ Lagway is just that talented, and he's been in this system for a while. I think you just plug him in, and I think it'll be okay. As long as those receivers can get separation, he's going to find them.
Yeah. Well, for Florida fans, obviously that's what we hope. So next up here, I think you came up with this one as well, but we'll throw our guy Rick a bone here and jump into Alabama. And we thought, or you thought, the biggest burning question is not specific. I mean, it's obviously quarterback related, but not specifically just the quarterback, but just Ryan Grubb. He is reuniting with Kalen DeBoer. Can he elevate the Tide offense after what was at least, let's say, very inconsistent season in 2024?
I mean, I think the answer is yes. Right. Like I didn't have a chance to really dive deep into those, statistics at Washington when he and DeBoer were linked up there at Washington, but we all know it, right? We all saw it. And they had incredible season there with Michael Penix. Those offenses were humming. And between Grubbs and DeBoer, they have a great relationship. They coached together for 13 years. This is like peanut butter and jelly, right? It just goes together well. And whenever it's together, it's going to be good. So I have a feeling that with what DeBoer wants to do on offense, Grubbs knows it like the back of his hand. And Nick Sheridan, I thought, did a pretty good job play calling last year. A lot of it was out of sync, right? We all know Jalen Milroe is an incredible talent. He's a great quarterback, but he wasn't exactly what they wanted for that system. It's not the type of quarterback that they typically want for that system. And so I think they tried to do it 2 personnel last year. And frankly, like a lot of the stuff was open, right? Like we watched a lot of those games, watched a lot of that, the replays and stuff. Jalen Milroe was kind of missing wide open wide receivers, right? And for whatever reason, they had trouble getting the running game going as well. So I think that they've got plenty of returning talent this year. We all know that Grubbs and DeBoer, like I said, are like peanut butter and jelly. They go together like this. So I think that it is a big burning question for Alabama, though, is, whether or not that offense really hums, because off the back of that, right, like burning question 1B is how good is Ty Simpson? Is Ty Simpson the guy for all 12 games? Do they end up having to go to Austin Mack? There's a lot of things coming out about Ty Simpson out of Tuscaloosa right now that people are really excited about. I'm hearing a lot of stuff from folks around the program at Alabama that, hey, watch out for Ty Simpson. Like he really has the talent, and he's been in this system now, and that folks are excited about him. So I think a lot of it hinges on, what Alabama looks like on offense this year. And I personally expect it to be much improved.
I agree. I think it will be much improved. The thing I'm really interested in, again, is it's less so about quarterback. I think you bring up a good point, whether it's Simpson, all signs seem to be pointing toward that. And if he is the starter, he's been there a very long time. He was a very highly touted recruit. He's probably got the arm talent and obviously experience in the system, being his second year under DeBoer and his 4th year, I think, on campus. But I'm interested to see if kind of the guys around him. We talked a lot about the Bama offense last year and their inability to run the ball unless it was Jalen Milroe. You look back at that 2023 Washington team. Of course, Penix was a fantastic quarterback. I'm not expecting Simpson to be that, although he could, but I wouldn't bet on that. But just looking back at some stats, Washington had a stud running back. I'm sure, I remember he was a stud. I didn't remember his name. I just looked it up. Dylan Johnson. He ran for almost 1,200 yards and 16 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Does Jam Miller do that for Bama? Do they have somebody that can be a bell cow like that? And then again, of course, on the outside, that 2023 Huskies team had Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze, both who went pretty high in the NFL draft. So they had a ton of talent to work with. I think that Grubb is a very good OC and will be able to improve the offense, especially with, again, a full off season with a lot of guys returning, and just, implementing his system and maybe having a little bit better of a grasp for the offense than the OC last year, with how he and DeBoer work together. So I think you're right. I think it elevates, and from there it's just a matter of how much does it elevate, and how far can they go with that.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, we'll keep rolling on here. Next up is Arkansas. And again, we're as expected, probably with a lot of these burning questions. A lot kind of hinge on, offense and quarterbacks and what's going on, just because there's a lot of unknowns, especially on that side of the ball, and no different at Arkansas. So Taylon Green saw solidified starter, second year in the system, second year under Bobby Petrino. But who's he going to throw to? And I'll dump it off to you here to enlighten us on the wideout situation in Fayetteville.
I mean, that's the question, right? I mean, they lost a bunch to the transfer portal. I'm trying to remember here. I'm flipping through Phil Steele because I was looking through it today, and this is why I got to this burning question. But okay, Taylon Green. We all know Taylon Green. We all know he's talented. We all know what he can be, and especially in the second year in Petrino's offense. I believe they lost their top 8 receivers from last year. I believe I read that correctly in Phil Steele. So they also lost Luke Haas, who unfortunately sounds like he's going to miss a lot of the year at Ole Miss, where he transferred to. But yeah, so they added 8 transfers, which included Omega Blake I think he came from Charlotte, I believe. UAB, Cameron Shanks is coming up. They also brought in Fresno State's Raylan Sharp. So they had some decent talent there at wide receiver last year, but they're all gone. Everybody left. Isaiah Satenga's at Oklahoma. Luke Haas is at Ole Miss.
Tesla's in the NFL.
Yes, the kid who went off, I think Armstrong, in the bowl game, he went to Cal, and also looks like a Terminator now. I don't know what they have in the water out there, but all that to say, getting back to Arkansas, yeah, they lost a lot in the portal at the wide receiver position, at the tight end position. So, who is it going to be that steps up for Arkansas at wide receiver that Taylon Green can throw to? We know that he's going to, be able to run the ball. We understand he's very good with his legs. So who is it that steps up at wide receiver? Who is Taylon Green going to be throwing the ball to? Who is Taylon Green going to have those connections with, for his 1, 2, and 3 wide receivers? If I'm, teams early in the year, right, they have two gimme games to start off the year. They got Alabama A&M and then Arkansas State in Little Rock. And then they have Ole Miss in week 3. So by week 3, you really need to have that humming, because if I'm Ole Miss right now, right, I'm watching those first 2 weeks to see what that looks like. And I'm thinking, hey, we're just going to key in on the run and make these guys pass, and we'll see what they have. We'll see what they got. So that's the biggest question mark, I think, for me, is what the Hogs have at wide receiver.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't have much to add other than just throwing out some names. I'm looking at the Pick 6 previews here from Brett Ciancia, and he says, as expected, Arkansas lost all those receivers and tight ends. So they, of course, hammered the portal at those positions. They picked up Jaden Platt, a former 4-star from A&M at tight end. And then at receiver, they got 2 former All-American Athletic Conference players in Omega Blake and Cam Shanks. And, then they have a bunch of other G5 / former, decent recruits that, are depth essentially. So yeah, very much a mystery on who he's going to be throwing to, who will emerge. And I think, Taylor Green showed enough last year that if he has weapons, I think he could be pretty dangerous, but just really don't know if he has actual weapons or not. So that's our burning question on Arkansas. Next up is going to be Auburn, and I actually came up with this one, so I'll intro this a little bit, and this ties back into fall camp a bit as well, thanks to a soundbite from Hugh Freeze's press conference. But again, sticking with the theme, and we'll get into some more, defensive and some other stuff with other teams. But so far, we've been hammering the offenses, in particular quarterbacks. No different at Auburn because they bring in former 5-star Jackson Arnold, and that's a giant question mark. And then I would say the Auburn offense overall. You look at what they did last year. They really only they have a few guys returning on the offensive line. They brought in a couple transfers on the offensive line that they expect to step in and started at their previous stops. But you lose Jarquez Hunter, you lose Keandre Lambert-Smith. They did pull in some guys in the portal at wideout in Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech and Horatio Fields from Wake Forest. And obviously Cam Coleman returns. But again, my biggest just burning question here is kind of what does the offense look like? And can Hugh Freeze find some of that, magic that he used to have? He used to be very well respected as an offensive genius, really, from his time at Ole Miss. His offenses at Liberty, I know it's only Liberty, but were very effective. And in his 2 years at Auburn, they have just not been good. Peyton Thorne was not really the answer, but even when Peyton Thorne played, decent, I thought the Hugh Freeze play calling was odd. We harped on it all last year with not really giving the ball to Jarquez Hunter. And to put a bow on this burning question, in case any of y'all missed it in Freeze's press conference today or yesterday, I don't remember exactly when the quote came out, but he was talking about how he asked DJ Durkin to take it easy, tone it down on defense, because his main goal coming out of these practices and coming out of fall camp is to get Jackson Arnold confident, which is not a bad plan or idea, but it really makes you wonder and question how far along Jackson Arnold is. If you have to ask your defensive coordinator to tone it back during fall camp, and the fact that he would air that out publicly, I think is just kind of foolish, because obviously we know the confidence issues that Jackson Arnold probably has, not just because he's, struggled with turnovers, but he got benched last year at Oklahoma. Things did not go well there. He transferred for a reason. And to air that out publicly really, again, just makes you kind of question, okay, is Jackson Arnold going to be good? Or is he going to be a guy that throws 18 touchdowns and 14 picks next year, which would be a very bad sign for Hugh Freeze and Auburn?
Yeah, we'll see. I agree. I think Jackson Arnold is the biggest question mark that you have on offense. He has the talent. There's still a lot of people. I haven't given up on him yet. I think he could still figure it out at Auburn. And, to go a little deeper into that too, Jackson Arnold's going to have all the weapons that he needs there at Auburn. They have a stacked wide receiver room, right? We all know about Cam Coleman, but you also brought in Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech. And then you also have Malcolm Simmons, who it looks like, he's hopefully going to get past his legal issues and should be starting there as well. And so, it's not just those wide receivers as well, but you also have at running back, you lose Jarquez Hunter, but most people are pretty high on this running back room. I mean, they've got Damari Alston, who's a senior, and they've got Jeremiah Cobb, who's probably the most talented of the bunch. And then you brought in also, you got Darrell Robinson, who was at UConn last year. So they also will be behind a pretty veteran offensive line. This offensive line should be pretty good. And you expect also that Auburn is going to utilize Jackson Arnold's legs, much like Oklahoma did last year. So I expect a pretty multiple and varied offense from Auburn. That it just remains to be seen, right? Can Jackson Arnold really get it going through the air and be able to utilize all of this talent? on the outside that Auburn has. And then Hugh Freeze, right? Can Hugh Freeze get on the same page with play calling? Because it has raised a lot of questions in the past couple of years, as we harped on many times on SEC After Dark last season, and then also throughout this offseason here on this channel. It was just the feed Jarquez the rock, man. I mean, I think if he carried over 20 times, they won. And if he didn't, they lost. And they multiple games where they lost, where he had under 20 carries. And it was just like, what on earth? So
Right.
I think that I have a feeling, Hugh Freeze has got an ego, and like all these coaches do. So he's going to want to do it his way. But I have a feeling that he probably looked back in the offseason and thought about that. It's like, all right, I don't know if they have a Jarquez Hunter here in this stable of running backs, but they do have enough talent to be good there at running back. And I think this offense can be better, much better, with Jackson Arnold at the helm, as long as he's that guy and as long as he, takes another step in his development.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they're improved, but again, that's the biggest question. I think Auburn defensively, especially with DJ Durkin, he's got baggage of his own, and us as Aggies, we were not sad to see him go when all that went down with Jimbo, but he's got a proven track record for a number of years as a very solid to better than solid defensive coordinator. So I think the defense is in a good position, and it really all hinges on Jackson Arnold and that offense, the play calling, et cetera, in terms of how successful and effective Auburn is in 2025. Moving on to one of Auburn's biggest rivals, and continuing our offensive trend here, we'll go to the Georgia Bulldogs, and I'm going to kind of put this on, Mike Bobo again. I don't think this is totally. It's not totally a Mike Bobo issue, and it's not totally a quarterback-driven issue. But my burning question for Georgia is just, what is this offense going to be, and can it be improved? Because similar to Auburn, but even more so, everyone trusts the Georgia defense. Now, they're not as good as they were in, say, 2021 when they won their first title since the 80s, and they haven't been the last couple of years. But at the same time, when they won in 2021 and again in 2022, their offense was really good. Stetson Bennett was awesome. Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, they had a stable of running backs. And last year, Carson Beck was very erratic. They had basically no running game to speak of from the tailbacks. And their wide receivers, frankly, were a mess. Arian Smith, really just not effective. Deion Bell hurt a bunch / also not very effective when he played. I mean, it was very much a hodgepodge of, we hope this guy can catch it when he's open. And I think that definitely played into Carson Beck's struggles, because we saw him a year prior have a great season. So coming into this year, it's just like, okay, what is Mike Bobo going to do with the offense? Because I have to imagine they're going to need to find a running game. That's, I'm sure, an emphasis for Kirby is like, dude, get the running game in order. I don't care how you do it. We need to be able to run the football. And then obviously, through the passing game, very interested to see what Gunnar Stockton can do. And interested in the wide receivers they brought in the portal. Our former, Aggie, Noah Thomas, is now a Bulldog, and so is former 5-star Zechariah Branch out of USC. So presumably they upgraded at wideout. Quarterback certainly remains to be seen, and running back, I just sort of trust that Georgia has guys that are good. Can they run block, and can they actually, be effective? Time will tell. But I think the burning question for Georgia is, what is your identity on offense? Because they did not have one last year, and I'm interested to see what Bobo does in 2025.
Yeah, I'm with you. I look, there's all the talent in the world right now for Georgia. They're always loaded, as you would expect. But this year they really bulked up that wide receiver room. As you mentioned, you got Oscar Delp coming back at tight end. They're going to have all the weapons that you need to be successful. So the two question marks are what you raised right here in this question. Mike Bobo, can Mike Bobo use those weapons? to bring Georgia back to, an 11-win season or 10-win season, SEC championship, and college football playoff type of year. And then Gunnar Stockton, right? Can Gunnar Stockton, much like Jackson Arnold, can he use the weapons that are around him? Because you got everything that you need to be successful. Now, can you make sure that you get those guys the ball and allow them to create in space? I mean, you got Zachariah Branch, right, that came in. You got Noah Thomas that came in. Colby Young, right? So Oscar Delp, as I mentioned. There's a plethora of weapons here. You got Nate Frazier at running back, who was a highly touted recruit. Freshman year, he had 671 yards last year. So coming into his sophomore season, he's expected to be the bell cow of this group. And it's just a deep running back room, as it always is at Georgia, right? They grow them like corn out there in Georgia. They're just always popping up incredible running backs, and they have for the past 15 years. So it's really just about, can Gunnar Stockton step up? Can he utilize those weapons that are around him? And can Mike Bobo, as folks, in Georgia have had their consternation at times with Mike Bobo and the way he's run the offense, can Bobo and then can Bobo with Gunnar Stockton utilize those weapons that are around him? Because you got everything you need to win a national championship with the weapons that are on the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to keep on rolling here, and I'll flip it back to you. We'll go a little bit out of order here, but just to give you the floor again with one of the questions you posed, and we'll go to the as our friend Corey Burton of Locked On Vandy and his Dogs podcast, the Regular Guys podcast that he does. He likes to say both ends of the spectrum of the SEC. So we're going from Georgia to Mississippi State, since Vandy is no longer the SEC bottom dweller. And the question you said here for Mississippi State, the burning question 2025, is who's on the team? Fair question. Who are these guys?
Who the heck is everybody? Who the heck even are these people? So I don't remember the exact number, but it was something like 40 transfers out from this program. And Jeff Levy talked about it at SEC Media Days, just about how many transfers they had to bring in. And, you're looking through, right? I'm reading through Phil Steele the other day, and you're going through like, okay, aside from quarterback, right? Because they did lose Michael Van Buren. He left and went to LSU. But you have Blake Shapen, who comes back, and then you bring in who's the Luke Croman-Hoke from Florida State. And then you get Kamario Taylor as a freshman coming in. But then running back, you have to bring in you bring in a couple transfers. Then it was like, just go down the list of these different position groups. It was like, lost 6 guys from last year, and you brought in 5 new transfers, brought in 6 new transfers, brought in 4 new transfers at this position group. So it's really it's just a hodgepodge. They're really going to have to put together just a lot. And we've talked about this a lot on this show, just about with the data that we now have from the transfer portal, right? We've got a couple years now of data in the transfer portal. Most of the teams that have been successful, there's a couple outliers, but most of the teams that have been successful in this era have mostly done well in the recruiting rankings, and they have developed their players. They have done very well at retention of keeping kids on their roster, and then they have filled spaces that have a couple holes on their roster. So they'll bring in, 8 to 10 transfers in the portal, right? Maybe 15 at the most. And then those guys plug the holes, or maybe they add a little bit of depth. But most of the guys that are producing for your team are the ones who have been in your system for a while, right? We all know that football, it's not easy. You got to come in and learn a new playbook. Whether you're on defense or you're on offense, right? Unless you're coming into a system that is very similar to the one that you ran at your previous school, it's difficult to just come in to a new school, especially when you're talking about a Mississippi State that's bringing in all of these different transfers. You got to mesh. You got to understand what the guy next to you is doing. You got to understand, what all your roles are and what your routes, right? Or if you're on the offensive line, it's about all your blocking scheme and working together as a unit. Football is a team game. It's all about units, and it's all about how those guys play together, because you can do your job, but if the guy over here isn't doing his job, well, you just gave up a 40-yard play, right? Or you just got a sack when everyone else on the team did their job. And so that continuity and that playing together and the reps and practice and all that together over the course of a couple of years is what generally makes the best teams. So bringing in all these new guys, like who the heck is on the roster? It's just, I think it's going to be another building year in Starkville. And so that's what you got to look at, man. Who the heck is on this team? Who's going to step up? And are these guys all going to mesh together in order to give Mississippi State a fighting chance? Because last year they gave a couple teams, a run for their money, but the goal this year has to be get an SEC win, get 2 SEC wins, right? Like just start to build for the future for Jeff Lebby. And looking at this roster, man, it's going to be tough because of all the new faces that are there.
Yeah, it will be. Just to put some numbers to your question here. So again, referencing Pick Six previews, 60 new scholarship players have arrived in Starkville since December. 31 of them high school signees, incoming freshmen, and 29 transfers. So yeah, more or less a completely new team. And then he goes on to say here, Brett Ciencio goes on to say, more than half of the projected 2 deep are incoming transfers. So everyone is new. Now, Lebby has been very vocal, as you mentioned, during SEC Media Days, even back to spring ball, that the roster is more talented, that they are better. So it's possible that this works out. But as you said, pretty big gamble when you have that much roster turnover. So I agree. I think the most burning question for Mississippi State is, who are these guys? Who's going to play? who's going to be there on Saturday actually making plays? Because it's just a ton of new faces. It's hard to keep up with, and it's hard to project transfers and how they're actually going to pan out. So, we'll see how they do it. Jeff Lebby's got his work cut out for him, I think. But yeah, hopefully they can get a SEC win and not lose to a MAC team by 3 scores at home. That would also be a big step in the right direction for Mississippi State. So sticking with sort of the predicted, we'll say, SEC bottom dwellers, I had Kentucky. So my burning question for Kentucky, again, we're going offense here, and that's QB and the weapons. So Zach Calzada, as Aggies, as SEC fans, you're probably familiar with that name. He was a Jimbo recruit way back in the day. I think he's got to be pushing 25 now. I think he was in the class of 19. Played a few years at A&M, never was the starter until Haynes King got injured, and he took over in that 2021 season. Was very up and down, has good arm talent, but struggled at times with turnovers, and also probably a lot of that not his fault because he's playing in a Jimbo Fisher offense where every quarterback struggled. But ultimately transfers away from A&M, goes to Auburn, never plays it down, is injured, out for the entire season, and then goes to Division III Incarnate Word in San Antonio, has 2 phenomenal seasons, lights it up statistically speaking, but it's Division III Incarnate Word, and now he's back in the SEC at Kentucky. I don't think he's been named the starter, so perhaps he won't be. That maybe, I don't want to bag on the guy, but maybe that would be a good sign if he does get beat out, meaning that they actually have somebody, pretty decent on the roster, but presumed to be the starter. And beyond him, again, to kind of take it back to what he struggled with at A&M, I don't think the weapons were the issue at A&M. I think it was the coach and the offensive system. But at Kentucky, I think the weapons could be an issue. We talked about this plenty this offseason. They lost their 2 best receivers in Dane Key and Barryon Brown to the portal. They had a total of 5 receivers leave the program via the portal. They did bring in a couple of former big-time recruits in Kendrick Law, transfer from Bama, and I think it's J.J. Hester from Oklahoma. So, again, they have dudes that used to have, a certain amount of stars, 4 and 5 stars attached to their name that haven't really done anything. So I guess those are the guys you're counting on. But, my burning question would just be, is Zach Calzada an SEC quality starting quarterback? And then if he is, does he have anybody to throw to?
I don't need to expand on that too much because you hit the nail on the head. They lost Dane Key, and then who's the other one that went to LSU? Why am I forgetting his name?
Barry Brown.
Barry Brown. Yeah, Barry Brown and Dane Key. So losing those two, that hurts, man. But the problem for Kentucky is that they've been cycling through offensive coordinators, like just constantly. So it's been a new system for the last like 4 or 5 years. I mean, it's just constantly been a turnover. And then you've been bringing in a new quarterback every single year to try to learn a new system and then to try to, go out and play. And so it's just been, it hasn't worked out. And now we're going to try and do it again, right? With you got your offensive coordinator returns finally for the first time in years, but you have Zach Calzada who's coming in. He's got to learn a new system, right? He's got to figure it out. Now he's got to get on the same page with all these wide receivers. I do think that Zach Calzada has the talent to be an SEC starter. We saw some flashes of it in games with Texas A&M. I mean, he beat Alabama, and go back and watch some of the highlights from that game. He threw some dimes. He can spin the rock. He's a pretty solid quarterback. I remember Mike Huseman, our friend from Off Season After Dark. Mike, I know you're in the chat tonight. A couple shows ago when we were talking about the over-unders on the season, we got to Kentucky, and he mentioned that, I was talking up Zach Calzada, and that I believed in him, and I gave Kentucky the over because of Zach Calzada, and he said that I believed in Zach Calzada more than his mom does. So There may be some truth to that. I do think it's going to be difficult with the new system coming in for Zach Calzada, but got to remember, go all the way back to his recruitment. He committed to A&M fairly early. A&M, Jimbo, and they wanted him pretty quickly. They had identified him, even though he was a 3-star coming out of school. They identified him and they said, this kid is somebody we want. And then it got down to the wire, and Georgia came in late, and Georgia really wanted Zach Calzada. They made a hard push for Zach Calzada near the end of his recruitment. So Georgia thought he had the talent. A&M thought he had the talent, and so did Auburn when he went there for a year and didn't play because of injury. So I do think that he has the talent to be an SEC starter. It's just a matter of, hey, can these weapons step up? Can he, figure it out on the offensive system quickly enough to really get things going? So we'll see. That is the big burning question for Kentucky.
No doubt. Well, I don't know. We're maybe about halfway through, so we're probably going to go a little over time. We'll try to go rapid fire on these last handful of teams. But before we do, we'll take a quick break to thank the Steer Agency for sponsoring the podcast. Football is all about strategy, just like winning in business. Whether you're dialing up the perfect play on Saturdays or looking to dominate in public affairs, PR, or digital marketing, you need a team that delivers results. That's where the Steer Agency comes in. They craft winning strategies that get you seen, heard, and ahead of the competition. Don't just play the game, control it. Visit thesteeragency.com today and take your brand to the next level. Appreciate those guys sponsoring the show. Also, not a sponsor, just a shameless plug in case they want to. I've got my Tabasco polo on. I'm a big fan of Tabasco hot sauce, and we're doing burning questions. So obviously I had to rep the brand. So, hey, Tabasco, we have a big audience in the Southeast right in your demo. So hit us up for sponsorship opportunities. We would be thrilled to work with you. All right. So let's see. We'll hop in here. We'll go to LSU. A lot of people are predicting good things for the Tigers this year. So I came up with the burning question, and that to me was, does Blake Baker's defense step up? I think, there are some questions on offense, mainly the offensive line, but LSU, even with the inability to run the ball in years past, especially since Brian Kelly got there, like offense hasn't been the problem. With Nuss coming back, with the weapons he has, I think they'll be solid on offense. It's the defense that I have burning questions about, because they were very much improved last year under Blake Baker in his first year. I think they went from somewhere in like the hundreds to maybe like 60s in overall defense, which is a big improvement. But to get where they want to go, which is competing for an SEC title, making the playoff, and honestly making a run in the playoff. I mean, I think it's pretty clear with Nuss coming back, with the money that they spent in the transfer portal, they are all in. So honestly, even just, making the college football playoff may not be enough to meet this team's goals. But so again, that's why it hinges on the defense for me. I mean, I'm going to list off a few guys here to emphasize what they did in the portal on defense, but these are all at least 4 stars rated guys coming into the portal. They picked up Patrick Payton, edge, Bernard Gooden, defensive lineman, Jack Pyburn, edge, Jamari Butler, edge, Mansour Delane at corner, Jakeem Jackson at corner, AJ Hulsey at safety, Tamarcus Cooley at safety. So again, they're basically trying to rebuild their defensive line and their defensive secondary in the portal. In year 2 of Blake Baker, with all these transfers, can they take a step up to what I think, not just for LSU fans and what we've come to expect with LSU in terms of defense, but to get to the level that they want to get to, they have to have, I think, a minimum top 25 defense. Can they get there in year 2 under Blake Baker is my, burning question for the Tigers this fall.
Yeah, I agree. I think they can. We talked about it, and Brian Kelly has mentioned it as well, a couple times now in the offseason, that the talent level on the defensive side of the ball for LSU has not been where it needs to be for a program like LSU for the last couple of years. Kelly has taken a little bit of responsibility for that, but it's on him. The talent level on that side of the ball has not been up to the standard of LSU, but they have the guy in Blake Baker. Blake Baker is a solid defensive coordinator. And now it feels like, with all those names that you just mentioned and everything that they just did in the portal, and as well as some of the guys they have coming back, like a Whit Weeks, and maybe if Harold Perkins can finally get back to his freshman form, they really have a lot of talent on that defense that you would expect them to take another jump up. They lost a lot along the defensive line, so that's kind of a question mark. But again, they brought in somebody like Patrick Payton, and they really tried to shore that up. So I think that LSU will be better on defense, and that definitely, though, is the burning question, because on offense, they should be pretty solid. Everybody knows all about Garrett Nussmeier and what they have on offense. So the defense is really where the concerns are. Yeah,
totally agree. Let's kick it over to Columbia, Missouri, not South Carolina. You had this one here. So the burning question for Mizzou looks like a lot of burning questions. Defensive line, wideouts, QBs, many questions. So take it away.
Yeah, so defensive line, they lost a good amount along the defensive line, a good amount of production. And so we'll see, what they end up being along the defensive line. I think their defense should be pretty solid, but the defensive line is kind of where those questions are. Wide receiver, obviously, they lose a lot. They lose Luther Burden. They lose Theo Weiss, and they also lost their third wide receiver as well, Mookie Cooper, who was the Ohio State transfer. So you got a lot at wide receiver that you're having to replace. And then flowing from that, right, who's going to play quarterback? It looks like everybody thought it was going to be Bo Pribula, but I saw you tweeted out, today from our Biscuits and SEC account on Twitter that Sam Horn is really looking like he's kind of taking control, and that, the team seems to be behind him. Now, that could just be one clip, right? It's maybe out of context. Who knows exactly what's going on there? But he seemed to be, really firing up the team. There's been a lot of talk, and Eli Drinkwitz was very keen to say at SEC Media Days that this is a competition. Bo Pribula is not the starter necessarily. Sam Horn is very much in consideration for this job right now. So those are my 3 questions for Missouri. I think it's kind of 1A, 1B, 1C. Defensive line, how are they going to look on the defensive line? They need to kind of cut down on some of those blowouts that we saw last year, like against Alabama and against Texas A&M. So that defense needs to be a little bit better. And if they're going to be better, the defensive line needs to be solid up front. Everybody knows in the SEC, winning starts in the trenches. So they got to be solid along the defensive line if they're going to stay at that 9-10 10-win level. And then from there, it's the QB and wide receiver combination. Who's going to be the QB, and then who replaces all that production in wide receiver that they've come to rely on over those last couple of years of really solid seasons.
Yeah, not much to add there. I think, we talked a little bit about, Mizzou and our over-unders. They have a pretty favorable schedule in terms of, at least SEC schedules. So a lot of questions, but a lot of opportunity if they are, ready to seize it. And I have no reason to doubt Drink, even though I do think I picked the under. So, yeah, Mizzou, a lot of questions there, undoubtedly coming into 2025. Let's see. Let's go just a little bit southwest of Columbia and bring in Oklahoma, if I can find. Here we go. Yeah, so this was you as well. So your burning question here for Oklahoma is the wide receiver core, which I think is a very good point to bring up. So let us know, what the questions are and what that position group looks like for OU.
Yeah, so everybody's excited about John Mateer, right? I think he's a household name before the season's even started. We've heard so much about John Mateer this offseason from SEC media types, from coaches, from all sorts of folks who are really talking him up about what he did at Washington State. So everybody's excited about him. Everybody thinks that he's going to be really solid. The question for you there is who are the wide receivers, right, that he's throwing to? They had so many injuries last year and issues with injuries that it kind of tanked the season to some degree, right? Everybody puts it on Jackson Arnold and thinks that he wasn't that good, and that Seth Luttrell, that it really wasn't a good fit, for everybody there. But everybody forgets that they had their top 5 wide receivers out for almost the entire year, right? Some of them came back late in the year, but they just had the injury bug at that wide receiver position. So they return a couple here. They return who is it? Burks and Gibson. And then they also brought in
Burks.
Yeah, right. Deion Burks, right. He'll be solid, right? He should be very good. Isaiah Satenga, they brought him in from Arkansas. And then they also lost Bauer Sharp. He went into the portal. So, you got Isaiah Satenga is likely going to start. Deion Burks likely to start. And then you got Giovanni Gibson as well, who's likely to start. He was at Arkansas Pine Bluff last year. So you got a couple transfers that they brought in, and you got a couple of guys like Deion Burks who's coming back. Or excuse me, he was at Purdue last year. Is that correct? Yeah, I think so. So anyway, it's a lot of new faces there at Oklahoma. Whether it's John Mateer, he's going to be the new face of quarterback, but everybody expects him to be very good. But then, okay, who's he going to be throwing to, right? You got Deion Burks, you got Isaiah Satenga. A lot of these guys have talent. Most of them were highly recruited guys. So, but at the end of the day, right, you got to show it on the field. You got to show that you can produce. And so who's it going to be that steps up in that wide receiver room for John Mateer to be able to have the type of season that folks are believing that he can have?
Yeah, I agree. I think the easy question here would just be to go to John Mateer, but I think you're probably right in terms of, it remains to be seen exactly how good he will be in the SEC, but I think he will be a, top half of the league quarterback. He's shown and proven that he is a good college quarterback, and it's more so, how do the weapons around him look? What does he have at wide out, and how far, with how talented or not talented that group is, how far can he go? Because even I think with an average receiving core, again, I think Mateer will be pretty solid. If he has a really good receiving core, he could be very good. I mean, I think I have been telling people to pump the brakes on, the Mateer Heisman hype. But again, if the offensive line and the weapons around him turn out to be really good, then he, I think, does have the, talent and sort of moxie to put himself in that conversation. So, yeah, we'll see what happens at wideout for Oklahoma. How about going down to Oxford? Our friend Stephen Willis, the Locked On Ole Miss podcast host, and check in on the Rebels with their burning question. So this again was you, and you think the burning question is, how will the Rebels replace the D-line production, which is fair given what they lost?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. They just lost a ton of production along the defensive line, right? I mean, you lose Walter Nolan, you lose Princely Umanmielen, I believe he's gone as well, right? So
he's gone, yeah.
Yeah, he's gone. So
Jared Ivey, I think, is gone.
Jared Ivey's gone as well, right? I think JJ Pegues is gone. I think I'm correct about that. So
yeah, I think so.
And as well as Xavier Harris. So you have a lot of these guys who left. They added 2 transfers in, lose some, 4 of their best defensive linemen, names that we just mentioned. So that was a strength of Ole Miss's team last year. They were very good along the defensive line. They had some mountains there on the defensive line. So if Ole Miss has a lot of question marks across the board, if you go down their position groups, right, there's many questions there. Probably they have a lot of talent still there, but probably a less talented team than last year, as we've talked about previously on this show. So, but the defensive line is one that's big to me, right, because that was a staple of last year's team. It really helped them get to that 9-win mark. So who is it going to be on the defensive line that fills in for those guys and replaces that production? They brought in, a few guys in the transfer portal, as we mentioned. Cam Franklin at defensive end is expected to be a starter. Xavier Harris is back, so I was incorrect about that. He'll play nose tackle, and then Jamarius Brown. So that's expected to be your three guys along the defensive line who are your starters. Again, plenty of talent there. It just you got to step up, and they're not as big or as talented as last year's group, but still should be a solid defensive line. They just have to step up and produce.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think Ole Miss has quite a bit of questions, just given what they lost. But just looking here, they had 4 all SEC defensive linemen depart after last year. So pretty clear in a league that is one of the trenches that defensive line production is paramount for them, and that's definitely a big question for the Rebels in 2025. Speaking of departures, we'll go to Knoxville. And obviously the burning question here is Joey Aguilar, that dude, or able to, do anything close to what not necessarily Nico did last year, but what maybe he was projected to do this year, as everyone was kind of expecting a big jump up for him. And Aguilar comes in after starting 2 years at App State, transferring to UCLA after last season in December, and then transferring to Tennessee after spring practice this year. I mean, again, it's kind of a cop-out, but clearly Joey Aguilar is the burning question for Tennessee. To take it a little further and expand on it, I think, again, who's going to be the running back? So you lose Dylan Sampson, who led the SEC in rushing a year ago, which is no small feat. And so, who's going to, carry that load? The 2024 team was second all time in Tennessee's history in rushing yards as a team with 2,942. So a lot of production, not even just Sampson, needs to be replaced there. So I think those are the 2 burning questions for Tennessee. Clearly, is who's going to tote the rock, and is Joey Aguilar going to be a decent QB or not?
Yeah, I think that's right. And just to expand a little bit on the running back situation, looks like they have 2 sophomores that are expected to take the load this year. That's going to be Deshaun Bishop, 5'8", 208. He played in 10 games last year, had 455 yards on the ground, 6.1 yards per carry. So that's a pretty good clip. Peyton Lewis is expected to be the backup. He is a 6'1", 212 sophomore. And he 13 games last year, had 339 yards and 5.3 yards per carry. And then they also filled some depth in there with Star Thomas, who is a senior. He came in from Duke. He had 10 starts last year at Duke and had 871 yards and 4.1 yards a carry at Duke. So have some talent back there. They're young, but you want them to be able to be solid in the run game to take a little bit of pressure off of Joey Aguilar, especially early in the season, to really start to get things going and, start to hopefully have the game slow down a little bit for him. If that running game is not able to get going, I think they're going to have some trouble, because I think that, in order to get that passing game going with a quarterback like Joey Aguilar coming in late, right, having to learn a new system. Heupel's system is not, super complicated to learn, but there's still a learning curve. It's it's like any other offense, as we've talked about, tonight. You need to have time in order to really, and reps in order to get things right in an offense, no matter what it is. So if you're able to get the running game going and you're able to take a little bit of pressure off your passing game to start the year, I think that's the recipe for success for Tennessee. And so at running back, one of those guys between Deshaun Bishop, Peyton Lewis, and Star Thomas really has to step up.
Yeah, and I do think the good news for Tennessee fans is if you look back at Heupel's offenses at UCF and early on, pre-Dylan Sampson or before 2024, he consistently has a 1,000-yard rusher. He typically does have a very good back, has a good run game. I think kind of similar to Lane Kiffin. Oftentimes people think that offense is more predicated on, big plays, explosive plays through the air, when a lot of what they do is hand the ball off. It's fast and they run a hurry up, but they hand the ball off a lot. So if the offensive line can block, I think they will probably have somebody pick up the slack. I don't know that they have a Dylan Sampson on the roster, but between those three guys, you're probably right. They should be able to, pick up a lot of that production. So, all right, I think we've got 4 left here. So we're in the fourth quarter home stretch. We will take it now to the other Columbia for South Carolina. The burning question for the Gamecocks 2025. How will the offensive line hold up, and who's going to step up at wideout? A tale as old as time.
Yeah, that's right. So they lost a lot along the offensive line. And this has been an issue for South Carolina for a couple years now, really, right? The last 2 years have been an issue. If you go read my 16 and 16 on South Carolina, which I posted last week on biscuitsSEC.com, I believe they lost 4 starters along the offensive line, or maybe I think it was 3 starters along the offensive line, and had to backfill. They have some talent there, and they got a couple really solid kids in the recruiting class recently who are coming in, but they had to backfill. I think they brought in 3 offensive linemen from the portal, might have been 4. So it's been a question. It's been an issue, especially for the last 2 years in Columbia. It was an issue last year, really, and Lenora Sellers, kind of brushed over some of those issues. They still gave up a lot of sacks last year, but because of Lenora Sellers' running ability, he was able to get out of pressure and kind of turn some negative plays into positive yardage. But how much can you rely on that, right? Like, you need the offensive line to step up and to be able to protect Lenora Sellers, first of all, because he hasn't had the injury issues that we've seen in Gainesville with DJ Lagway, but you never know. You don't want to have those chances, right? If you can lessen those chances of Lenora Sellers getting injured, you're going to try and do that every chance you can. So the offensive line has to mesh. They've got some new faces there. They got, they're going to have to put three new faces onto the offensive line to start. And so can that offensive line mesh, and are they able to protect Lenora Sellers and be able to get that running game going as well? Because you don't have Rocket Sanders anymore, at running back, and you may not even have Rasul Faison, who is still trying to figure out if the NCAA is going to grant him eligibility, the transfer from Utah State. So those are kind of some burning questions there on offense, wide receiver as well. You got to figure out who's going to be the guy, right? Nick Harbor has all the talent in the world. It's finally time for him to step up and become that guy for Lenora Sellers. And so then other than that, right, you got some guys who have been around, but they really haven't produced at that high a clip yet. So Lenora Sellers, if he's going to take that next step in his development, everyone understands that he was pretty good in the passing game last year, but he's got to be better. And he's got to take that next step if South Carolina is going to continue the momentum this season. So those wide receivers need to step up. And in particular, I would say it's got to be Nick Harbor.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, one thing to mention here too, with Sellers needing his wideouts to step up is last year, Joshua Simon, the tight end, led the team in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. He is gone. So all the more reason that, of course, if a tight end steps up, great, but they need a wideout to step up. And interestingly enough, you can read into this however you want. South Carolina did not take a transfer wideout this cycle. So Shane Beamer, no stranger to the portal, must believe in his team, which I think is probably a good sign. But also, again, you're relying on guys that are unproven. I'm sure South Carolina fans maybe would have preferred, even if it's a G5 dude, somebody that's put up some numbers because nobody on the roster has. So we'll see how that pans out for the Gamecocks. All right, I can take the next one here. We'll go to our Aggies. And yeah, my burning question was focus on the defense. Again, we probably could have taken this to the offense and Marcel Reed and their issues at wide receiver with the transfers that they've brought in. But I wanted to focus on the defense because really last year when the Aggies fell off late in the year, it was the defense's fault outside of the Texas game. That was a great performance by the defense, but in general, I mean, you look at the South Carolina game, the Auburn game, the bowl game, it was defense just getting gashed. They couldn't get quarterbacks to the ground. They didn't get consistent pressure. And then the secondary was just getting totally burned. So my burning questions are, what can the Aggies do at defensive line that was very inconsistent last year, but lost 3 dudes to the NFL in Nick Scorton, Shamar Stewart, and Shamar Turner. So they're replacing guys that were extremely talented. And then the secondary, they didn't really lose anybody. They're bringing everybody back, but again, they kind of stunk last year. So the talent is obviously there. Will Lee is expected to be very good, and I don't think he was the problem last year. But who's going to start opposite him at corner? It could be Des Ricks, could be Julian Humphrey, the transfer from Georgia. Tyreek Chappelle, who's a longtime Aggie, I think he'll be in his 5th year, has started across multiple seasons, was hurt last year, could also be that guy. Bryce Anderson, one of the few guys remaining from the 2022 class, has been a multi-year starter at safety. They really need him to show something this year. So I'm very interested to see who steps up in the secondary. And then on defense, Elko has been pretty vocal about a couple of transfers, Rylan Kennedy and Cassius Howell, who transferred in ahead of last year. So this will be their 2nd year on the team and in the system. But again, can those guys really step up and produce better than, a guy like Scorton or Shamar Stewart? And I tend to think so with Elko taking back over the reins of the defense. But we'll see. I think, again, I think I have more questions about the Aggie defense heading into 2025 than I do the offense.
Same here. I'm excited about the offensive line for the Aggies. They're experienced. They're deep. Wide receiver is extremely talented as well. You don't have a lot of size at wide receiver, which could be an issue. But other than that, the talent is there. I think Marcel Reed is set to take a jump. And you have one of the best running back rooms in the country, in my opinion. So the offense isn't that big of an issue or that big of a worry to me for Texas A&M. The defensive line and the secondary is what you mentioned. Those are the 2 big questions. Linebacker, they have a great linebacker room. They're very deep at linebacker, and they returned 2 starters in Scooby Williams and Torian York. So the linebackers should be solid. Should be all SEC caliber type of linebacker play for A&M this year. I think that the defensive line, they're maybe not as talented, or the names don't jump off the sheet to you as much, but I actually think that this defensive line could be more productive than the one that was last year. There was really not that many sacks from the team last year, from Nick Scorton and from Shamar Stewart and Shamar Turner, that you were expecting. You were expecting those guys to wreck games, and they did in a couple, but you go back and look at their numbers and you're like, where were the sacks? Like what was going on there? And there's a lot of names like Cassius Howell, Rylan Kennedy that you mentioned, DJ Hicks. Maybe it's finally time for the former 5-star to step up at nose tackle and really start to produce. You also have a guy like Albert Regis, who's been around for a long time in College Station. So should be a good defensive line. I'm expecting good things from that. The big burning question to me is the secondary. Again, stacked with talent. You mentioned a lot of names. Probably going to be Des Ricks that starts across from Will Lee at the other corner spot, and then potentially Julian Humphrey. They're the ones battling it out for that one. But again, lots of talent in the secondary, but it's got to come together. With Mike Elko calling the defense this year, I think it's going to get much better. I think you're going to see significant improvement from this defense, especially on the back end. And that's really where the Aggies need it, because they started leaking like a sieve in multiple games at the end of the year, including in the Auburn game. Texas got them in a couple. They were able to hunker down in the red zone and get a couple of turnovers in that game in order to keep that game close. But then they got gashed badly in the second half of the Southern California game when they played them in the bowl game. So that is the biggest question to me, is the secondary, and are they able to utilize that talent, to develop that talent, and to get it to the point where A&M is back, in a top 20, top 30 defense.
No doubt. No doubt. All right, we got 2 more left. Appreciate y'all sticking around for some extra football chatter. We will go to the other team in the Lone Star State, Texas. Can they reload in the trenches is your burning question for the Longhorns in 2025.
Yeah, I think that's the big question, right? They lost a ridiculous amount on both sides of the ball. And everyone knows how talented Texas is, and they have a lot of talent coming back on the offensive line and on the defensive line. They just haven't played a lot of snaps just yet, right? They have guys coming in on the offensive line who weren't starters last year but have been in the program. So it was kind of like next man up. It's now their time to shine on the offensive line. But they just don't have a lot of starts under their belt. And with a new quarterback coming in Arch Manning, you got to be able to protect him. And then not only that, but they need to come together for this running game as well. You got Quintravion Wisner coming back for Texas at running back. So you have an experienced running back who's, he had a great season last year, but you got to be able to get it going. You got to be able to get that push. They're big along the offensive line. They have a bunch of Goliaths up there again. And the offensive line, though experienced last year, they struggled at times, right? So there's room for improvement, even with how good the offensive line or how experienced the offensive line was last year. So that's a big question there along the offensive line. Having to replace 4 starters is always difficult, and the offensive line is a huge key for success in this conference, as we all know. And then moving over to the defensive line real quick, they're loaded with talent. They got a ton of talent, but they lost a couple big ones last year, right? They lost Colin Simmons and they lost Trey Moore. Between those guys, they had I think 15 sacks, close to 15 sacks last year. And then also around 11 or 12 tackles for loss. So a lot of production that they're having to replace along the defensive line. They bring back, they bring back Vernon Broughton, which is great. Vernon Broughton is gone as well. So that's another one.
Broughton's gone. Simmons is back. Colin Simmons returns.
Oh, Simmons is back. Okay, so I'm sorry. I had those mixed up. Simmons is back. Vernon Broughton is gone, but they are having to replace a lot along the defensive line. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. 2 of the guys who are coming from the transfer portal, you have Travis Shaw and what's his name? Cole Brevard, who was at Purdue. Both of them are expected to produce at a high level. And Travis Shaw was a former 5-star, played a lot last year at UNC. So both of those guys are expected to start along the defensive line. So I think I read that wrong too when I was doing this. So I think Trey Moore is also coming back. So anyway, they are still losing a lot along the defensive line in terms of production. They lost multiple guys to the NFL. They added the total number of transfers that they added along the defensive line was 5. So they added 5 transfers. They added Cole Brevard, Travis Shaw, and then a couple of depth guys. And then the rest of the guys behind them are very highly touted recruits, right? They were big recruits. So don't expect the talent level to drop off too much. And you think that this defensive line is still going to produce at a high level, but still you gotta replace a lot of production along the defensive line, which makes it a question mark.
Yeah, I would agree. Texas doesn't have a ton of question marks, frankly. Some would consider Arch Manning perhaps a question mark, although I don't know. I mean, I expect him to be very good. I don't know if he's going to win the Heisman. I think he's the favorite. That seems a little bit of a stretch, but he was a former number 1 overall recruit, 5-star. This is going to be his 3rd year in the system. Like, if you don't think he's going to have a good year, then, you're probably just drinking the haterade, which, don't get me wrong, I've had a few sips of it myself, but I think if we're being real here, he's going to be good. How good, time will tell, but he's going to be good. And I agree with you. I think this really, how far Texas can go this year hinges on how they're able to replace the guys up front on the defensive and offensive line.
And I was reading my run sheet wrong here, so that's why I was getting myself mixed up. But to put a bow on it, they're losing their top 5 defensive linemen from last year's team. So that's a lot to replace, right? And that includes Vernon Broughton in that. So it's a lot of production they got to replace. But again, very talented. Should be a next man up situation of the Alabamas and Georgias of old, right? Of just, new guy up and a lot of talent to replace those guys.
Yep. All right. We're saving the best for last. Vandy.
Yes, sir.
My burning question is basically, we've talked about this. I'm curious to see if there is a sophomore slump. So my burning question is basically just, now that Vanderbilt is not going to sneak up on anybody, everyone will take them seriously. They know it's not a gimme game any longer. And SEC defensive coordinators have had a full offseason to prepare for the offense that, not just with Pavia and some of the personnel that people weren't expecting to be great, but even just the style with a lot of those like triple option principles. And it's a very interesting offense and unique, and not one that SEC defensive coordinators are used to facing. And I think it caught a lot of people by surprise last year. So my burning question is basically just, how good can they be in year two? Will they, with another year in the system, with Pavia coming back, actually take strides and be better? They could. But I also think there's definitely some room here for, okay, it's still Vanderbilt. They are not as talented as most of the teams they're playing. And now that everyone takes them seriously and has seen not just Pavia, but the entire offense on film for an offseason, is there going to be a little bit of a drop-off? So that's what I'm looking for in 2025 for the Commodores.
Yeah, we've talked about that on this show, right? That the fact that they now have a year of tape on Vanderbilt and what they like to run could be difficult going into this second year, because now teams have a better way to prepare for them than they did last year. I assume Vanderbilt, right, is going to throw in some kinks and some wrenches into that going into this year to try to keep teams off guard. But the other part of it too, though, that I think you mentioned it in your open, is the uniqueness of that offense, right? It's still going to be unique. It's still going to be different than what most teams face. And so you go from facing, an Auburn or a South Carolina or a Texas A&M that run offenses that you see more often than you see an offense like Vanderbilt's. It still could be difficult, because then boom, you got to, switch it over and then start preparing for Vanderbilt, which is a completely different type of system than anybody else really runs in this conference. So still could be a little bit difficult, but I wonder if they can repeat, right? Can you repeat, and can you keep it going after you have done it for 1 year? Now let's see it again. Can you keep it at 6 wins or more?
Yeah, agreed. The adjustment to the adjustment, how can Vandy adjust to teams adjusting to them is a key in 2025. All right. Wow. We have gone super long. We obviously bit off more than we could chew with going through every single SEC team.
You like to do that around here.
Probably should have done 8 and 8. But fear not. We got 2 more things before we wrap, of course, with a Muschamp Coach of the Week and a Biscuit of the Week. You put these together for us, so I will kick it over to you for the Muschamp Coach of the Week.
Okay, so Muschamp Coach of the Week. For all of you viewers out there, you know that we love Coach Muschamp here on this program. This is an ode to Coach Muschamp and his passion and love for the game and for his players. And so we like to feature a coach every week that exhibits that passion. Could be also a funny moment. Coach Muschamp at times could be adversarial with the media. He could, have a quip every now and again, and was super passionate. So we like to feature a coach that embodies the style of Coach Muschamp. So this week we had an interesting one out of Big 12 Media Days. That we had a couple potentials here. We had Hugh Freeze with his interesting comments about length and girth in the SEC, but we decided to go a different route.
Not from his burner phone, from a press conference.
From a press conference, yes. Said it out loud in the media. So very interesting. I think that he was talking about hot dog concession stand hot dogs, and I think that's what he was really talking about. And he's right about that in terms of concession stand hot dogs. So we decided to go a different route though this week. This week's Muschamp Coach of the Week is Dave Aranda. So let's check out this clip from Big 12 Media Days.
There's a scene in The Wolf of Wall Street when they're talking about throwing midgets, and it's like, hey, this midget can he, can he roll there? And you go, no, he doesn't roll. You throw him, you know what I mean? And they're made for throwing. And then after a while, they start talking, and they go, well, you know what? I think if you start talking, they may think they know we're making fun of them. The midgets may think we're making fun of them. So then I'm gonna start, they may get mad at us. And then the guys go, well, what we need to do is make them think they're one of us. And they go, one of us, one of us. And I think that's the thing with coaching, call it recruiting, it's that way. They talk about acquiring players, getting rid of players, just like that. And the whole thing underneath all that is they make them think they're one of us. You know what I mean? And it's like, but I don't know. Do you have to do that to win? That sucks. Yeah.
Shahan,
One of us. One of us. I don't know what that was about. I need to find the question that he was answering, but it obviously was about NIL, right, and bringing in players and recruiting in this day and age. But he just went off completely, to left field, talking about the Wolf of Wall Street scene where they're talking about throwing midgets, and you got to make them think they're one of us. I was just stunned when I listened to that. What a wild answer, but I guess some humor there from Coach Aranda there in Waco.
Yeah, I guess. I don't really know. He's always been a bit of a oddball, is good for some interesting quotes, but typically pretty insightful. I'm not really sure what's insightful about that. I don't really know what he's getting at. I'm kind of with you. That seems like a completely out of left field and honestly not even really pertinent metaphor there.
Pretty bizarre answer to that question. As the guy in the tweet mentioned, that was a good word for it, bizarre. Hey, look, if I'm the social media team for Baylor, I think we got to bring in, midget wrestling now. And we got to have the players, all hang out with the midget wrestling team. And I say that with all love. Those are a lot of fun. I think those guys get paid well who do the traveling wrestling shows. So, hey, why not just play into it, I guess, or something. And who knows? Maybe not. Maybe don't toss them. Maybe just let them do their thing in the ring.
Probably.
Wild.
Probably. Yeah, that was a very wild answer. We'll be hearing more from Dave Aranda because they play Auburn week 1. So we'll keep tabs on him and make sure everything's on the up and up coming out of Waco. Sometimes it's not. So we got to keep tabs on those guys down there. All right, last one. Biscuit of the week. Y'all know we obviously we are Biscuits and SEC. We love food, SEC football, and biscuits, and so we like to feature a biscuit of the week here. We have a listener submission this week. I think our friend Rick could not make it through this marathon of a show, so unfortunately, I think he's bowed out. But Rick, hopefully you can watch this back tomorrow because we're going to be featuring the biscuit you sent in. So let's get this pulled up, and then Alex, I think you can give us an explanation of what we're looking at here.
I'm not really sure what we're looking at, to be honest with you. Rick didn't give me a full explanation. I tried to ask him, but it's okay. So Rick, he tries to live a healthy lifestyle, and we respect that. So right here, we're looking at some vegan bologna. So vegan fried bologna, some vegan sausage with some gravy. I think that's a vegan biscuit there to the left side that you're seeing. And then that looks like some maybe vegan zucchini bread or something. I'm not exactly sure, but I mean, it looks wonderful. So that is our friend of the show, Rick Wilmarth, Rick and Bonnie on YouTube. If you guys ever see them pop up in the comments. So Rick has been a longtime watcher, longtime listener, good friend of the program. And so did some great work there on staying healthy and, keeping up the Biscuits name and keeping up some, trying to make it decent. Look, man, I'm not a vegan, and I know it can be tough to find some good vegan food, but I think Rick and Bonnie there do the best they can, and it looks like it was a solid breakfast there. So thank you, Rick, for your submission there. We appreciate it. If anybody wants to submit a biscuit of the week for us, you can DM us your biscuits, or you can just tag us on Twitter, as Rick did, at Biscuits and SEC. Or you can always send us an email as well with some attachments and an explanation of what we're looking at. Please give us an explanation of what we're looking at and a recipe maybe that typically helps us with our show. But anyway, contact at biscuitsandsec.com if you guys want to shoot us an email of your biscuits. So thank you, Rick. That is your biscuit of the week.
Love it. Yeah, if we have any other vegan listeners out there and you need some tips on how to still eat biscuits but stay within your dietary restrictions, hit up Rick. He seems to be the guy. That's his second submission. So
yeah.
he knows what he's doing when it comes to vegan cooking. As you said, I'm not a vegan either, so I certainly don't. The biscuits that I'm consuming are not vegan friendly. So I can't help you there, but Rick can. And we love him for watching and submitting that to us. Appreciate the engagement there. That is all. We need to end. We've gone so far over. Shameless plug. Subscribe to the newsletter. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next week, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday nights. We'll be on tomorrow on SEC After Dark. We've got a bunch of other guys and shows in the After Dark network. We have off-season After Dark on Tuesdays. Bama After Dark on Tuesdays at 6:30. The regular guys pod with Corey Burton. They just check their Twitter, give them a follow. So we've got a big things going on at the After Dark network. Of course, Locked on Ole Miss with Stephen Willis. Jake Thomas is the man in charge of Bama After Dark, and Mike Huseman is running with Off-Season After Dark. So if you're not tuning into those shows, you're missing out. Give them a watch. And yeah, that's all I got. We'll see y'all next week. Thanks for tuning into the Marathon Show.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see y'all next Wednesday. We'll see you tomorrow night for SEC After Dark.
That's right.